Why do we get so hurt when someone insults us? Have you ever wondered how just a few words, spoken in seconds, can haunt us for an entire day, sometimes for years? A negative comment online, a dismissive glance, or an offhand remark from a coworker can feel like a knife straight to the heart. I remember once reading a short criticism about me online. And that was it. My peace was gone for the rest of the day. I couldn't focus on work, I had no interest in doing anything, and my mind kept replaying those words over and over. I thought I was strong. But somehow a single sentence was enough to shake me. The funny thing? The person who wrote it probably forgot about it in 5 minutes, but I carried the wound around like it was carved into me. When I started looking deeper, I realized the real pain wasn't coming from the words themselves, it was coming from my ego. That part of me that craves recognition, wants to be admired, and fears being judged. When someone pokes at it, my defenses flare up, just like a hedgehog raising its quills. And the more I tried to protect it, the more trapped and exhausted I felt. Deep down, we all carry a perfect version of ourselves, a mental image of how we want others to see us. Whenever someone's words clash with that image, it feels like an attack on who we are. But if you really think about it, that image is just a story we've created. It's not our true self. And yet, we spend most of our lives protecting it, which is why we live with constant tension, anxiety, and fear of being found out as imperfect. Modern culture makes the ego even easier to inflate. Social media is like a stage where everyone displays their best moments, greatest achievements, and carefully curated versions of their lives. And when someone throws a rock onto that stage, a criticism, a sarcastic comment, it feels like the whole world just saw our flaws. In reality, most people aren't paying as much attention as we think. But our ego magnifies it 100 times. Letting go doesn't mean letting people walk over you or staying silent when something truly needs to be addressed. It means understanding that someone else's words are just a reflection of their state of mind, their beliefs, and sometimes their pain, not your worth. And once you see that clearly, you stop getting swept away by every emotional wave. There's a saying in America, don't take it personally. But to actually live that way, it takes more than a reminder, it takes mental training. It's about noticing when your ego wants to jump in and defend itself, and then gently setting it down. True freedom comes when no one else can control your emotions. When someone insults you, you can listen, feel the heat in your body, notice your racing heartbeat, and then take a deep breath before reacting. You can ask yourself, does this really define who I am? Or is it just their story playing out in their mind? When we let go of the need to always be right, to always be liked, to always be validated, life gets lighter. Praise or criticism become just sounds passing through the air. They can't add to or take away from who you truly are. Today, I want to invite you to explore ego, not by suppressing it, not by denying it, but by understanding it. Because when you truly see it for what it is, you'll find real freedom. Not the kind that depends on people saying nice things about you. And when we finally learn to open our hand, we don't just drop those words, we drop the heavy weight that's been pressing on our heart all along. What is the ego? Simply put, the ego is not your true self. It's the mental image you think you are, a psychological portrait you've painted in your own mind. And that portrait doesn't always reflect reality. The ego is built from the stories we tell ourselves. I'm the best. I can't be wrong. I'm a victim. I'm special. Whether positive or negative. These are still just stories, they're not the essence of who you truly are. If you notice carefully, the ego doesn't exist as a tangible thing you can touch or hold. It only exists in thought. Every time you define yourself with a label, wealthy, poor, successful, failed, smart, clumsy, you're giving the ego another costume to wear. The danger is this. The ego is very good at making you believe it is you. It's that voice in your head whispering or shouting when you're criticized, I can't let them talk about me like that. It's the pride you feel when you're praised, and the collapse you feel when you're judged. The Buddha taught, the path to liberation is the realization of no self. It might sound abstract, but it means this: when you no longer identify with any image or story about yourself, you're free from fear, pain, and pride. Think of the sky. Its nature is vast and open. But when clouds gather, people say, the sky is gloomy today. In truth, the sky hasn't changed, only the clouds are passing through. The ego is like those clouds. It's not the real sky, it's just a temporary cover. Forget the sky's true nature, and you'll think the clouds are all there is. In daily life, the ego is everywhere. When you argue just to prove you're right, even over something trivial, that's the ego. When you feel uneasy because someone is doing better than you, that's the ego. Even when you want to show how good you are compared to others, behind that urge is the ego searching for validation. The ego isn't entirely bad. It helps us function in society, know our roles, and sometimes gives us the drive to achieve. But if you let the ego lead every decision, you'll live in constant exhaustion. The ego always wants more success, more praise, more power, and when it doesn't get it, it drags you into suffering. There's a saying in America: your ego is not your amigo. It might make you feel powerful for a moment, but it can shatter your peace just as quickly. When you see clearly that the ego is just a mental illusion, you start taking life less personally. You no longer need to win every argument. You don't need someone's agreement to feel worthy. And most importantly, you stop fearing when people see you differently from the story you've been telling yourself. In Buddhism, no self doesn't mean you disappear or lose your personality. On the contrary, when you're free from the ego, you live more authentically, because you're no longer trapped by labels and expectations. You can laugh when you're wrong, listen when someone disagrees, and remain peaceful even when you're misunderstood. The ego is like a mask. It's not wrong to wear it in certain situations. But the problem is we forget we're wearing it, and we mistake the mask for our real face. No self is when you have the courage to take that mask off and see that your real face, wrinkles, scars and all, is the most beautiful thing, because it's real. Only when you see this clearly do you truly begin to walk the path of liberation. The difference between self and ego might sound subtle, but when you look closer, you'll see they are entirely different. The self is your natural awareness of who you are. It's like a clear mirror, reflecting what's there without distortion or decoration. The self doesn't add color, it doesn't twist the image, it doesn't need to prove anything. It simply knows, I am here. I am breathing. I am experiencing. When you look in the mirror and see your face, you don't have to think, I'm beautiful, or I'm ugly. You just see, and recognize, that it's you. That's the self. The ego, on the other hand, is a different story. It's the magnified version of you, wrapped in definitions, labels, and expectations. The ego doesn't just want to exist, it wants to be defended, admired, and validated. If the self is pure sunlight, the ego is that sunlight passing through a prism, bent and colored by thoughts, memories, and comparisons. Think of the self as the roots of a tree. The roots are steady, hidden deep in the ground, quietly nourishing the whole tree. They don't need to show off, yet they are the true source of life. The ego is like a coat of paint on the trunk. The paint can be shiny, colorful, even beautiful, but it's not the tree's true nature. Sometimes the paint is so thick, it hides the real texture of the wood underneath. The self is a place of peace, where you don't need to compare or compete. When you live from the self, you can accept that you're imperfect, that you'll be right sometimes and wrong other times, and none of it changes your worth. The ego, however, is always afraid of being hurt. It's always trying to prove that it's right, that it's smart, that it's special. The ego hates criticism, hates being overlooked. and reacts strongly when challenged. Here's the key difference: the self exists without anyone's approval. You don't need applause to know you're alive. The ego is different. It's like an actor on a stage, constantly needing an audience's claps to feel valuable. Without that audience, the ego gets nervous, insecure, and desperate for attention. When you identify with your ego, life becomes stressful. Every word, glance, or action from others can feel like a threat. But when you live from the self, you realize those things only skim the surface, they can't touch your roots. The self is like deep earth, unmoved by the wind or rain above it. The tricky part is, the ego is skilled at disguising itself as the self. It might say, "I just want to help everyone," but deep down, it's hoping for praise. It might appear humble, but secretly wants people to notice its humility. This is why the path isn't about destroying the ego, but seeing through its layers, stripping back the paint to find the true wood. In meditation, that moment when you simply observe your breath, without adding or judging anything, that's when you're touching the self. But the moment you think, "I'm meditating really well," or "I bet others would admire me for this," the ego has stepped in. Understanding the difference between self and ego is like finding the key to lasting peace. From the self, you're not afraid to lose what's outside of you. From the ego, you'll cling to everything, always trying to prove you're enough. A tree doesn't need paint to live, it needs its roots. And you don't need the ego to exist, you need the self to live a life that's authentic, light, and free. There's something fascinating, and a little tragic, about the ego. It honestly believes it's protecting us, but in reality, it's the root cause of so much of our suffering. If we look closely, we'll see the same pattern play out over and over like a never-ending loop: ego, desire, disappointment, suffering. 1. The ego is never satisfied. The ego is like a collector who can never get enough. It whispers constantly in our heads, "I need to be praised, I need to be recognized. I need to be better than others." These whispers might seem harmless, but they shape the way we live. A compliment, an admiring glance, an award, they all become fuel for the ego. But here's the problem: once it gets a taste of recognition, the ego will want more. It's like drinking seawater: the more you drink, the thirstier you get. Satisfaction never lasts. Because comparison and the need to feel superior are built into the ego's DNA. 2. When it doesn't get what it wants, negativity takes over. Once the ego sets up an expectation, anything less than that feels like failure. You hoped for praise but no one noticed. The ego feels insulted. You wanted to be the best, but someone else outshined you. The ego grows jealous. These emotions don't just come and go, they linger, they take root, and sometimes they explode into anger, bitterness, or deep insecurity. The ego is fragile. One piece of criticism can shake it to its core. 3. The cycle of suffering. The mechanism is simple but destructive. Ego triggers desire. Desire unmet leads to disappointment. Disappointment sustained turns into suffering. The dangerous part is that this cycle usually happens unconsciously. We don't even realize we're being led around. Because the ego is so skilled at disguising itself. It convinces us that what we want is reasonable or necessary for happiness. 4. A real-life example. Imagine you post a photo on social media. Deep down, you, or more accurately, your ego, hope for lots of likes and positive comments. If it happens, you feel happy, but it's a short-lived happiness. If the likes are fewer than you expected, or if someone leaves a negative comment, your mood instantly drops. Thoughts creep in: "I'm not good enough," or "people don't appreciate me." The ego has turned something simple, sharing a photo, into a test of your worth. And the truth is, tests like these almost always lead to pain. Because the ego's standards keep shifting and are often beyond your control. 5. The fragility of the ego. The ego is like a sandcastle. It might look grand, but one small wave can take it down. Compliments are like adding fresh sand, but criticism is the tide that wipes it away. So when your happiness is tied to the ego, you've handed your peace over to forces you can't control, other people's words, glances, and judgments. 6. Escaping the loop. The paradox is you can't win against the ego by giving it everything it wants. Like fire, the more you feed it, the bigger it grows. The only real way out is to recognize its nature, to see clearly that its demands and comparisons don't reflect your true value. When you start observing your ego instead of letting it control you, something shifts. You catch yourself thinking, I'm craving praise right now, or I'm comparing myself again. The moment you see the game the ego is playing, you've already taken a step outside the cycle of suffering. 7. Living from the self instead of the ego. The self, your natural awareness, doesn't need validation to feel complete. When you live from the self, you can still set goals, you can still want to grow, but you don't turn the outcome into a verdict on your worth. This not only reduces suffering, it makes you stronger in the face of change and failure. The ego is sneaky. It doesn't wear a name tag. It doesn't knock on the door to announce itself. It quietly slips into your mind, takes the driver's seat, and starts steering your emotions and actions. The tricky part is, when it's in control, you often have no idea. You think, this is just me, but really, it's the voice of the ego speaking. One clear sign is when you feel anger rising the moment someone gives you feedback. Maybe it's a coworker, a friend, or even a stranger online. The words might be harmless, but inside you feel a sudden heat in your face, your heartbeat quickens, and your mind rushes to defend itself. The ego instantly translates feedback into a personal attack. They think you're incompetent. They don't respect you. You need to prove them wrong. But feedback is just information, it says nothing about your worth. The ego, however, treats it like a dagger aimed at the image it's desperate to protect. Another sign, apologizing feels impossible. Deep down, you might know you made a mistake, but the words, "I'm sorry," stick in your throat. The ego hates to be wrong. To it, being wrong equals weakness, defeat, humiliation. So instead of admitting fault, you rationalize, you explain, or you simply stay silent, believing you're protecting yourself, when in reality, you're building a silent wall between you and the people you care about. The ego also thrives on comparison. It constantly measures where you stand against others, their salary, their appearance, their career milestones, their relationships, even their likes on social media. If you come out ahead, the ego basks in pride, but also fears someone might overtake you. If you fall behind, it whispers shame, jealousy, or resentment. Either way, you lose. Comparison is a game that has no finish line, and no one wins. Jealousy is another giveaway. When someone else succeeds, the ego often doesn't see it as an opportunity to celebrate or be inspired. Instead, it feels threatened. You might smile and say congratulations, but inside there's a quiet sting, why not me? What do they have that I don't? The ego wants the spotlight all to itself. But in truth, someone else's light doesn't dim your own, just as one candle lighting another doesn't make the first candle burn any less brightly. All of these reactions, anger at feedback, inability to apologize, constant comparison, envy, are knots the ego ties around you. The more knots there are, the less peace you feel. They keep you trapped in defense mode, always protecting an image, instead of living from your true self. The first step isn't to destroy the ego. Ironically, the harder you try to fight it, the stronger it becomes. The real first step is awareness. Catch yourself in the act, I'm feeling defensive because my ego feels attacked. Or, I'm resisting apologizing because my ego fears losing face. The moment you shine light on the ego, it loses some of its grip, because like darkness, it can't survive in direct awareness. Your ego isn't inherently evil, it's just a tool that's been given too much power. But when you see its patterns clearly, you can take the wheel back. And that's when you start living in true inner freedom, not needing to prove, to compare, or to win, because you already know your worth isn't dependent on anyone else's approval. Mindfulness is like a clear mirror, it reflects exactly what's happening inside you, without distortion, without judgment. When you truly practice mindfulness, you start to notice something fascinating. The ego is not the real you. It's more like a character in your head, constantly commenting, analyzing, comparing, judging, and especially, reacting fiercely whenever it feels threatened. Picture this: someone says something that offends you. It could be a direct insult or just a subtle, sarcastic remark. Instantly, a wave rises inside you, your heartbeat quickens, your stomach tightens, heat rushes to your face. Along with those sensations, a voice appears. To prove you're right, to prove you're better. Mindfulness doesn't ask you to suppress or deny these reactions. Instead, it invites you to watch. Like sitting in the audience of a play. You observe the emotions rising, the thoughts appearing, but you don't have to step on stage and act them out. You might notice, this is the sensation of anger in my body. Here's the voice that wants to fire back. This is my ego trying to take control. Simply seeing this is already powerful. Because when you see clearly, you're no longer fully caught in it. Just like when you realize a wave is just a wave, you're no longer terrified of being pulled under, you can stand and let it pass. The ego feeds on unconscious reactions. Every time you immediately act out of emotional impulse, it grows stronger. But when you pause, take a breath, and observe without instantly reacting, the ego loses its grip. That pause, sometimes only a few seconds, is a tiny space of freedom. And the more often you step into that space, the stronger your inner stability becomes. As mindfulness becomes a habit, you begin to spot the ego in subtler moments, the slight irritation when you're ignored, the swell of pride when you're praised, the twinge of envy when someone else succeeds. There's nothing wrong with feeling these things, but seeing them clearly keeps you from being controlled by them. You can even smile at your ego like you would at a loud but harmless friend. I see you. Thanks, but I'm not letting you steer this ship. As Americans often say, awareness is the first step to change. In the journey of letting go of the ego, mindfulness is your guiding light. It doesn't ask you to kill the ego, but to live alongside it, seeing it for what it is, and choosing not to be driven by it. When you view life through the lens of mindfulness, moments of offense stop being traps for suffering and start becoming opportunities for practice. You're no longer a puppet pulled by emotional strings, you're the observer, the captain. And from that place, you are truly free. Letting go of the ego through compassion. The ego thrives when we put ourselves at the center of everything, when life becomes all about me, mine, my wants, my needs. It feeds on constant self-focus. But the moment we shift our attention toward others, especially through the lens of compassion, its power naturally starts to fade. Compassion is not just pity or random acts of kindness. It's the ability to genuinely feel the pain and joy of another person as if it were your own. When your heart truly opens, you begin to see that every human being is carrying stories, wounds, and dreams. This awareness pulls you away from the endless task of defending your self-image and pushes you toward making our shared human experience less painful for everyone. Imagine someone says something harsh to you. If the ego is in the driver's seat, you immediately get defensive, strike back, or quietly store resentment. But if you see through compassion, you might pause and ask, what is this person going through? How much pain must they be in to speak that way? That question doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it removes the sting from your reaction. You stop seeing it as a personal attack and start seeing it as an expression of someone else's unresolved hurt. When you focus on another person's joy, the ego loses its top priority position. Like a child who stops making noise when no one is paying attention, the ego steps back when it's no longer being fed by self-obsession. Compassion makes your heart spacious, and in that vastness, the ego simply can't dominate. Contemplating non-self. If compassion is the doorway to a world beyond the ego, contemplating non-self is walking deeper into the truth of who we are. Non-self doesn't mean you don't exist. It means that the fixed, unchanging I that the ego clings to is actually an illusion. Look closely, your body changes every second, cells die and regenerate. Your mind changes too, thoughts, emotions, and memories arise and fade. So which part is the real you? Is it this body? These feelings? The stories in your memory? None of these are permanent. Contemplating non-self means sitting with and seeing this truth for yourself. When you realize everything is impermanent and not owned by a solid me, your grip naturally loosens. You no longer need to defend some rigid self-image, because you see there's nothing absolute to defend. This doesn't make you cold or indifferent. In fact, without the ego constantly in the way, you become lighter and more flexible. You can love without fear of loss, succeed without being intoxicated by pride, and fail without crushing yourself in shame. Non-self isn't just a belief to blindly accept, it's an experience to witness firsthand. Every time you release the need to be right, to be better, to be validated, you're tasting a bit of the freedom of non-self. And in that taste, there's a kind of peace the ego will never touch. We discover a truth that feels both simple and profound: everything is impermanent, including the image of me we think is fixed. We tend to cling to a solid idea of who we are. This is the kind of person I am, I'll always be this way. But if you look closely, you'll see that you never stand still. Your body changes every second, hair grows, skin sheds. The me of yesterday is not the me of today. It sounds obvious, but if you really feel the truth of it, it cracks the illusion of a permanent self. The you of yesterday may have been angry, while today you feel at peace. The you of a year ago may have dreamed of things that no longer matter now. So which version is the real you? When you see this constant change, the ego begins to lose its grip. The ego wants to lock in a polished, safe, or powerful image of itself. It hates change because change threatens its identity. But change cannot be stopped, and when you accept that, fear and clinging start to dissolve. Contemplating non-self also opens a unique kind of freedom. You are no longer bound by labels, expectations, or limitations, whether they come from you or from others. If I is just a flowing stream, then I can learn, grow, forgive, and begin again, both for others and for myself. You start to see that the person who hurt you yesterday is also not the same person today. They too are changing, learning, making mistakes, and trying to heal. This perspective breeds compassion and shatters the cycles of resentment. As the ego's hold weakens, life becomes surprisingly light. You can still live with passion, but you're no longer paralyzed by the fear of loss or the pain of defending a self-image. Instead, you move with the current of life, flexible, free, and always ready to welcome the new. The benefits of letting go of the ego. Letting go of the ego doesn't mean you give up your self-worth or become weak. In fact, it's the opposite. It's the path to a deeper kind of strength, one rooted in true freedom and peace. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that other people's praise or criticism no longer has the power to control your mood. A harsh comment can't weigh you down for the rest of the day, and even a compliment doesn't leave you dependent on constant validation. That's the lightness of living without the ego calling the shots. It's like breathing cleaner air. Everything feels clearer, easier, lighter. When the ego loses its grip, your relationships naturally become smoother. Arguments stop being battles to prove who's right. No more clashes of me versus you, where both sides are fighting to win. Instead, You start listening more, understanding more, and connecting with people from a place of respect and empathy. You don't need to have the last word. Because you realize that real victory is keeping harmony alive. Letting go of the ego also opens a rare kind of inner freedom. You no longer feel the pressure to maintain a flawless image. You don't have to be right all the time, outshine everyone else, or constantly secure respect. Inside, there's a spaciousness where emotions can come and go. Where life's ups and downs unfold without pulling you into the whirlpool of worry or anger. And when your mind is no longer trapped in invisible battles with the ego, a deep peace begins to take root. Not the fleeting calm of a quiet day, but a steady foundation you can stand on through life's storms. You can fail without losing your sense of worth. You can succeed without being consumed by pride. You feel at home in your own skin, and that stability radiates outward, touching the lives of those around you. Ultimately, the greatest gift of releasing the ego is returning to your true self. You, that doesn't need to struggle to be loved, doesn't need to be on guard to be respected, and doesn't need to compete to feel enough. Every step you take becomes lighter, freer, and more meaningful. Letting go of the ego isn't some distant philosophy. Nor is it a technique reserved only for monks or lifelong practitioners. It's a choice, one you can make in this very moment. Because the ego doesn't live somewhere far away. It shows up in our daily reactions, when we get irritated by criticism, when we feel the urge to prove we're right, when we're unsettled by someone else's success. Each of those moments is an opportunity to pause and realize, this isn't the real me, this is my ego speaking. Releasing the ego is like gently peeling away the layers we've built over the years. The layer of pride, the layer of comparison, the layer of needing recognition. As these layers fade, another version of you begins to emerge, one that is calmer, more open, and freer. This is your true self, the one that has always been there, only hidden behind the noise of the ego. When you live without being led by the ego, everything shifts. Criticism stops feeling like a wound and becomes a chance to grow. Someone else's success no longer casts a shadow over you, it becomes inspiration. And your own failures stop being a death sentence for your worth, they become meaningful lessons. You begin to see that peace doesn't come from everyone liking, respecting, or understanding you. Peace comes from you liking, respecting, and understanding yourself, without needing to prove it to anyone. When the ego dissolves, your heart opens. And when your heart opens, you see the world differently, with less judgment and more compassion. Imagine for a moment, if each of us loosened our grip on ego just a little, what kind of world would we create? There would be fewer conflicts, less division, and more moments where people genuinely connect. One person's transformation can spark a ripple effect, touching the lives of everyone around them. And if millions of people made that choice, peace would stop being a vague idea and start becoming a living reality. So today, I invite you to start with yourself. Watch your ego, not to judge it. Subscribe so we can keep walking this journey together. Leave a comment so I, and others, can hear your story. And share this with someone you think might need a gentle reminder. Because, as I said,